Hello everyone. So I wanted to share with you the story of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So I am actually out at Mountain Meadows today and I wanted to share this with you. So this happens in 1857, and in 1857 we have the Utah War that is also going on, where the United States Army from Kansas has been sent out by President Buchanan to put down a Mormon uprising or Mormon rebellion that wasn't actually happening, but people had started spreading rumors about the LDS people, and the rumors were sent back to the President of the United States and said that the Mormons were conspiring with the Native Americans to take over the federal government in the Utah Territory, which was obviously not true, but President Buchanan said, not on my watch. So he sent out troops that were stationed in Kansas to Utah to put down this Mormon rebellion. So that's where the Utah War starts. That is the reason for it. So during that time, Brigham Young, who's the leader of the Mormon people, in 1857, he hears that an army is coming out to hurt them. So they decide to basically fight back. But that's going on in the northern part of Utah. In the southern part of Utah, something else is happening. So in the southern part, Brigham Young has actually sent out a message to all of his people all around the Utah Territory to go into martial law, which means he didn't want his people trading with or helping other people, basically giving people supplies, food, anything they needed. He didn't want that happening outside of his communities. So at this time, you still have people that are going to California, pioneers and immigrants that are going to California. So during this time, you have a group of pioneers from Arkansas, and they are coming through Utah. And as they're traveling through Utah during this Utah War problem, this is happening. And so a lot of the LDS people obviously are not going to trade with them. By the time they get down to Parowan, they are really running low and they need people to trade with them and to help them out. But they are not doing it because of Brigham Young's orders. And so by the time they go a little bit farther south down into Mountain Meadows, which is where I'm here, they're really getting desperate. So down in that field here, that's where they're actually going to be camping, is down in that valley. That's where they're actually going to be camping out. Now during this time, they're pleading with people to trade with them. That is not the case, though. That's not going to happen. And so they're getting really angry. And so they start saying things that aren't necessarily true. Things like, we are the ones who killed Joseph Smith. We have the gun that killed Joseph Smith, which was not true. But when people get angry and hangry, they tend to say things that they don't necessarily mean or that are true. That was not true. They were also just saying things that were upsetting to the LDS people. One of the major things was a threat. And they told the LDS people that when they get to California, they're going to bring an army back from California and they're going to slaughter them all, which obviously the LDS people take that threat very seriously, right? And because these types of things had happened to them before, that's why they moved west. And so that was upsetting to them. And so they decided to basically get rid of these people, take them at their word that this was going to happen. And so they decided in Parowan, the leaders in Parowan, Utah, so like the stake president, the high council of the LDS Church, came up with a plan, and they brought in a man named John D. Lee, who was one of the southern settlers, who really helped, was like a leader down in the southern Utah. Bring him up to Parowan, tell him the idea, and tell him basically, you need to put this plan in action. And they send a letter up to Brigham Young, on a rider up to Brigham Young, to tell him what their plan was, but they actually didn't wait for the rider to come back with Brigham Young's response. They just did it anyway. So the plan was, is they were going to fire into these people's camp starting on September 7th. They're going to fire into the camp, John D. Lee, as well as some other LDS people, and he was able to get some Paiutes involved in this as well to help them. And then some of the Mormons actually dressed as Indians, as Paiute people, firing into the camp to make it look like it was really, they were under siege from the Indians. So they did that until September 11th. Now, they were under siege, people firing into their camp from September 7th to September 11th. And they couldn't get out to get water, to get food. They were really running low at this point. So on September 11th, 1857, John D. Lee walks into camp. and he walks into their camp under a flag of truce, and he says, I can get the Indians to stop firing on you, but you're probably going to need to give them something. So you'll probably have to give up your guns, give up some of your livestock, like your cattle, your sheep, things that you brought with you. Now, these people don't want to. These people from Arkansas, they really don't want to do this, but they really don't feel like they have a choice. They have to get out of here. And so they say, okay. And John D. Lee says, us as Mormons, we will escort you out of the valley. We're going to put you in 3 groups. So the wagon ahead was going to be the wounded who had been wounded from them firing into the camp for so many days. People were wounded at that point. And then the young children, and then they would have the women, and then the older girls who could, they walked behind them. And then their 3rd group was the men, and then the older boys who were walking as well. And they were going to escort them out of the valley. At this point, what's going to happen is, as they're escorting them, you have a Mormon on one side, and then you have an immigrant from Arkansas on the other. And John D. Lee is going to give a signal, and his signal is, men, do your duty. And then the Mormon is supposed to turn to the immigrant and shoot them. If they couldn't bring themselves to do it, then they were supposed to shoot their gun in the air as a signal, and somebody would come and do it for them. So there was about 140 of these immigrants who were out in these 3 groups. And then the 2 groups ahead, they were actually coming, there were Paiute people involved in this, as well as the Mormons. They jumped out of their hiding places and massacred and killed them all. So there were about 140 of them originally, 120 of them were killed. So this is really a tragedy, obviously. What happens next after they kill all of these people? There were about 17 children that were left, that 7 years old and younger, that they didn't believe could remember what happened and talk about the event. So they actually took them to local families' homes, and some of the children were actually injured. So they had to help them get better, and then they took them in until they could get them to relatives in Arkansas to be able to send them back. And with everybody else that was killed out on the battlefield, not really a battlefield, it wasn't a battlefield, it was a killing field, because the Arkansas people had given up their guns, and so it wasn't actually a battle. But out on the killing field, they left all of these bodies out there. They took whatever they wanted, stripped them with their clothes, anything else that was of value, and they took it. And then they just left them out here. So no proper burial, anything like that. And they tried to pin everything on the Paiutes, pin everything on the Native Americans. And obviously that wasn't true. Now, what's going to start to happen is people are going to start talking about this. First of all, there's all these people left out here. Like, what's going on, obviously. But the LDS people are going to keep it quiet, try to sweep it under the rug. But actually what starts to happen is when the kids get sent back to Arkansas with their families, they actually start talking about what happened. And the kids knew that it was not just Native Americans out there doing the killing. They knew that white people were out there doing the killing. In fact, some of them recognized some of the men who went home to their homes, that they were on the killing field, and they were like in their home when they had sent them to like these places before they sent them back to Arkansas. They sent them to these homes. Some of them were the homes of the people doing the killing, and they recognized them. And then when they got back to Arkansas, that's when they started talking about this. And so 2 years later, in 1859, the army comes out to this area, and they are the ones who actually bury the remains of these people, what was left of them, because obviously the animals had gotten to them, but they actually had buried them in 1859. And then they did a memorial type thing, stacked up some rocks, which actually, if you come out to Mountain Meadows, down in the encampment, or where they were camping and they were shot at for so many days, down in that valley, you can go down and see in that valley. But then there's also a replica of the rocks that would have been stacked up for these people. But ultimately, what's going to happen is there are going to be some people who basically go into hiding after this. So the people who came up with the plan in Parowan, Utah, the higher ups in the church in Parowan, they leave Parowan, they go into hiding. And then there's also some other people who kind of like go into hiding because they don't want to be convicted of this. But the one person who is actually convicted of this is John D. Lee. So John D. Lee is the one who came in with the flag of truce, who gave the signal, who was told that you need to put this plan into action. Oh, by the way, the writer that came back, it came back the next day after this happened, September 12th. The writer that was sent to Brigham Young to tell him this was our plan, he came back the next day and they said, with a message from Brigham Young saying, leave these people alone, don't do anything. But they didn't wait for the writer to come back. So, but John D. Lee is the one who actually gets convicted of this crime, even though he was not the only person out there. There was at least 50 other people involved in this, but he is the one who gets convicted. But he actually goes to trial twice. The first time, they don't have enough evidence to convict him, and so he is obviously let go. Almost 20 years later, what they're going to do is they're going to put him on trial again. And at this point, Brigham Young's actually going to make a deal with the lawyers and with the courts to say, we're going to give you evidence to help you convict John D. Lee, but you cannot come after the LDS Church for this. So basically, don't put the LDS Church on trial. You can put John D. Lee on trial and you can have your justice. So they agree. So they make a deal. He gives him evidence to convict John D. Lee, and then the LDS Church is not put on trial for this, even though obviously the lower leaders are the ones who came up with it. John D. Lee put it into place. But there were at least 50 other people involved in this event. But since he's convicted in 1877, they actually bring him out here to Mountain Meadows, into this area where the event happened. They bring him out here and they execute him by firing squad. So they shoot him, but they put his coffin behind him. So then they shoot him, he falls into his coffin, and then he is dead. And then his family, they take him to Panguitch, Utah, and they bury him in Panguitch, and that is where he is still buried today. This is a very tragic incident in Utah history, in U.S. history, in Western history. This is a very tragic event because, first of all, honestly, these people were very much... They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Utah War was happening, so obviously people were on edge from that, but also the LDS people had experienced all this persecution in the past, and so to them, these threats they were making were taken seriously. Whether they would have come back from California or not, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. Personally, I'm a little skeptical that they would have come back and hurt the LDS people by the time they had gotten to California. But they really were kind of, I feel like, just in the wrong place at the wrong time because of the Utah War, because that was going on. They were worried about the U.S. Army coming to hurt them, and then this group comes through. But it is a very tragic incident in Utah history, and it's one that is still actually debated today. There are so many books written on it. It's still debated today. But if you come out to Mountain Meadows, there are a few different stops you can make. As I said earlier, you can go down to the encampment, which is down there. And then they also, so if you drive up that way, then you can actually stop at the memorial for the women and the girls who were killed, and also the men and the boys that were killed in those groups as well. And if you come up to this area right here, this is going to be the names of the people who were killed. Right here in memoriam in the valley below between September 7th and September 11th, 1857, a company of more than 120 Arkansas immigrants led by Captain John T. Baker and Captain Alexander Fancher was attacked en route to California. And this event is known in history as the Mountain Meadows Massacre. So they have that. And then we also have the following children survived and were returned to their families in the Northwest in Arkansas. So in Northwest Arkansas. So all of these names, these are the kids who survived. But their names are up here because they experienced this event. Again, this is a really tragic event. It's a very dark part of our history, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but it definitely needs to be talked about because everybody has a story, right? And all of these people, they all have stories to tell. A few years ago, well, actually, no, I think it was 2 years ago, I met somebody who was their ancestor was killed out here, and also and like they come through like a cousin and whatnot. But anyway, on September 11th, that weekend, whatever that weekend is going to be, they actually have people come from all over the country, wherever they are, and they come to Mountain Meadows of the posterity, or the generations of people that were related to the ancestors of the people who were killed, as well as the kids that survived this event, and started talking about it. And that's how people started to actually know what happened. And that's why the Army came out here and found all of these bodies out here. So I actually met somebody I came out here on September 11th a couple of years ago, and I met someone whose family member was killed out here. And it was a really interesting conversation, and I think, it's still an interesting conversation to have with their families and the people who did this, because there are multiple sides to this event, but I think everyone can probably agree that it was a horrifying event, should not have happened. But then as we look at history, we have to look at it and say, why did things happen? And for us to be able to get better and be better human beings, because things like this shouldn't have happened, and they definitely should not happen now. But it is a really cool place to come out and check out, so definitely come out here to Mountain Meadows. There is the story of the Mountain Meadows Massacre.